Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition, a podcast where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA Musical Theater College Auditions, and today we have a great show lined up for you. McCaela Donovan from BU, that's Boston University. We've known McCaela for a while, and we were thrilled to have her come teach a masterclass for us this spring. And I think you'll really enjoy the conversation with McCaela. She's just really smart and wonderful. This is another one of our college deep dive episodes where you'll get that snackable audio tour into some various great theater programs around the country. Today with McCaela, we talked about adding tools to your acting toolbox. We talked about choosing the theater performance versus acting, which is a specific thing that Boston University has, as well as the possible ability to get a musical theater concentration in either of those tracks. McCaela tells you not to throw a chair at her during an audition, but everything else is fair game. We talk about what is a callback versus what is a first video audition, in kind of reframing the idea of what a prescreen is. And McCaela gives you the advice to journal after each of your auditions, which I think is some great advice. Next week, we've got Megan Picerno, who's currently going to be reopening Broadway as Christine in Phantom, in a fun, different path, because Megan comes from the world of opera. But before we get into all that, I wanted to do a little check-in with your goals and how those are all going with everyone. So have you done your time capsule yet? How is it going? Where are you with it? Megan, have you done your time capsule yet?
You know, Charlie, I need to take our own advice and do my own goals. I'm heading into a new school year myself, and I needed to have my vision board up.
That's right. Megan, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I'm mapping my own journey. I'm getting my master's in elementary education. Seeing that where that path takes me.
We love a mapping journey, and we love education. Just like you'll see, McCaela has like 19 degrees that she got herself. So we're a fan of education here on the podcast.
I'm going to try to beat her. I'm coming up on 2. Maybe we'll see where 3 comes along.
We'll see how it goes. The other thing, just kind of housekeeping wise, I wanted to clean up is we've got a number of different questions along the lines of like, hey, when are you going to have my school on, or blank school? Or sometimes people ask about the questions about the order, like, are you guys going in an order of top schools and then lesser schools or anything like that? First, to the first question, we'll say, yes, we're going to have your school on. Whatever that school is, we're going to have them on. It's just a question of scheduling. And just in terms of the order, we started with a lot of schools that we have very close personal relationships with, which of course is a lot of top tier BFA programs. That is tends to be true. It's certainly not a comprehensive list of all the top tier BFA programs, and there's plenty that we are in contact with and that we're scheduling. So those may be coming in the coming months and coming 6 months, et cetera. So the goal from our perspective is really to map the whole landscape, which is going to be all the most competitive schools, also newer programs, also less competitive schools, also not just BFA programs. We're going to have really a wide range of theater programs on there. We just wanted to kind of get started with schools that we knew really well, and some of the most popular schools certainly fit into that mold. But I don't want you to overly read into which schools are going in what order. It's not like a de facto top list or anything like that. And certainly, if there's a school that we're missing on there, we know about it and we're in contact with them, and we're going to try to get every single school before this is done. Do you think we can get every school, Megan?
I hope so. And if your college faculty is not on the podcast yet, bully them into emailing us.
Yeah, bully them into that. I like that, Megan. So you get a second degree with Megan, and she now she gets fiery, which I appreciate a lot. Also, Megan, Broadway's back. How are we feeling? Have you been following everything on the social medias and everything?
I have. I've been watching a bunch of the opening night curtain calls and the Waitress and Wicked One specifically. It's so nice to see all of our friends and colleagues headed back to work. But I think it's important to also look back on this past year that we went through and not forget our call for racial equity, and make sure that not only our casts are diverse and inclusive, but also our creative teams, and holding the higher ups accountable for their future action.
It's so true. There's that real duality of like, it's back, but hopefully it's not back to exactly what it was before.
Yeah.
But there is just that like pent up, you could feel the emotion of like, it's been years. I don't know if you listen to that Daily episode. There's an episode, not that you should listen to other podcasts, only listen to our podcast, guys, but the Daily did a great one. That's the New York Times on like, Broadway reopening and some of the feelings about it. And some of 6 who had their opening that was going to happen and it got canceled on their opening day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, this also means I'm going to the Tonys.
Yeah. How excited are you? Is this your first Tonys?
My first Tonys. And the first time I've worn a tux, not on stage, since prom. Like, I've worn tuxes on stage, but like they're like fake tuxes always, because it's like you throw it on, you rip it off. Like, so this is like, it's a real tux. And I had a bright blue tux for prom, but I'm not going bright blue this year. We're going a little more standard. I think.
Sure?
I'm pretty sure.
You can be Elizabeth something blue at the Tonys.
That's true. It's funny. Elizabeth and I were talking about like how different prepping for the Tonys this year is as opposed to like other years. Like, instead of like, where are we going to pregame and how great do we look? Like, everything we're talking about is like breast milk, and do we have the supply to give to my dad because we're renting a hotel room nearby to like how long can we be without her? And it's a very different experience at the Tonys than I think it would have been any other year.
Yes.
But for those out there, if we can send Elizabeth some good juju, not only a friend of the pod, but a friend of our life, and she's up for Best Leading Actress in a Musical, maybe we can all Tinkerbell it out there. And if we really believe, it'll come true.
Some wish and fairy dust.
With some wishes and fairy dust. Or if you're rooting for other people, that's okay too. You don't have to root for Elizabeth, but if you happen to, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's get into our episode and this great interview with Mccaela. Well, it is such an honor to have on the pod today McCaela Donovan. Mccaela has a BFA in musical theater from Ithaca College. She has an MA in theater education from Emerson College. She has an MFA in acting from Brandeis University. It's a ton of education. She's also the associate artistic director and founding member of the Bridge Repertory Theater of Boston. She's worked off-Broadway and in various regional theaters all over the country. She's taught at many places, including Boston Conservatory and Emerson College, and now serves as the assistant director of the BU School of Theater, where she serves as head of admission and recruitment for the performance majors. Tell a little bit about Boston University. It's in Boston, Massachusetts. They bring in a class size of about 12 to 19 students, and they offer degrees in BFA in acting, BFA in theater arts performance. And both of those majors have the ability to potentially concentrate in a musical theater concentration, which we'll talk about a little bit today, I'm sure. Yeah. And 100 other degrees in design, production, stage management, music, anything in the music world. A lot of degrees that you guys offer.
Yes, a lot of degrees.
How'd we do in summing up that school? I know, not too easy.
No, that was great. That was great. And it's good. It's always good to know that Boston University is in Boston, because wouldn't that be weird if it wasn't?
Okay, well, I'd say it for everyone else. I can't be like Boston University, where that's like when people are like Hamlet from Hamlet.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
Like, we know, I know.
Exactly. Yeah, no, you summed it up really well.
Why don't, before we dive too deep into the school, I'd just love to hear a little deeper dive on your own background. So how did you find yourself to be in this current position?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. That's a confluence of events. I think I went to school, like you said, at Ithaca. I majored in musical theater. I lived in New York City. I did the agent manager thing, and I did a lot of work down there. And actually, I'm old enough that I did a lot of work in soap operas back in the day. And then I really, to be honest with you, I really missed the sort of educational aspect of theater, the pedagogical experience of like unpacking a text and talking about it. And so I said to myself, like, I don't really care where I do theater. I just want to make sure I'm doing it with people I respect that are being creative and kind of piece together lots of different ways of doing this work. So I moved to Boston and I started the master's program at Emerson. And while I was doing that, I was lucky enough to start working as an equity actor and in theater, but also in do some SAG work in film and television around here. And then I was not going to go back to school. You do not need to get that many degrees, but at the time, Brandeis University offered me a place in their class, and they only took a class every 3 years, and it was fully subsidized. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And so I was in the acting company there, and that was wonderful. And I got my MFA, and then I started kind of like a little bit of teaching, a little bit of acting, a little bit of directing. So it's just really, I feel very blessed. And my sister is also a professional actor as well. She just did her first HBO TV show, actually, coming out next year. Yeah, shout out. And her name is Kelly Curran, and she's lovely. And I bring her in as a guest artist here sometimes. And it's fun to see how everyone can have different paths to doing what we do. And there are a multitude of schools and a multitude of training programs and ways to do this, but it's not necessarily like there is a way, a school, a place that's going to guarantee you opportunities. So, so it's really cool to see a lot of peers who I've worked with and gone to school with who are doing a multitude of things and going in lots of different directions.
That's well said. Let's do a little bit about sort of what it means to be a Boston University student. So I know that's not an easy, and let's say specifically a performance major at Boston University. What do you feel like that means in brief?
I think it means, like you said, it's not easy to define in that we see everyone as an individual and meet them as an individual. So there's not a specific like kind of person that gets out and is a BU performer, actor, director. I think there are the core values of that kind of person. So they are inquisitive and generous and multi-hyphenate. They have a lot of interests. They're intellectually motivated, and they have a sense of social justice work and creating change with their art. And I think all of those things are the kind of actor or performer that a BU student becomes. But they all come to us so different from different places with different goals. And I think our goal is to figure out how do we honor that individuality, strengthen that individuality, and also blend that with teaching skill sets from our points of view. And then the whole point is the student has all these tools now, and they don't have to like them all. They don't have to like, every single thing, but it's about like, oh, this works for me right now. This doesn't work for me. But then 4 years from now, oh, that thing that I didn't get in school, that works for me now. And I think it's about figuring out how to pick the tools from the toolbox and arm them with that.
Tell me a little bit about those tools. So if you start off and you're inquisitive and you're generous and you're all the reasons that you might have accepted this person into Boston University, what are they leaving armed with? What are all the things that they're learning specifically at your school?
Yeah. I mean, when they come in, they do a first year core. And what that means is they get a full year to explore. They don't have to choose a major yet. They're in the performance program, but we have BFA acting, BFA theater arts, and they get to choose that at the end of the first year. So what's nice is they get this sampling of all those tools in the beginning. They take acting, voice and speech, movement, theater ensemble, dramatic literature, Alexander technique. And within those things, they're studying a multitude of techniques. And so they get this full year experience. And then they get to say at the end of that year, like, I am hardcore acting. That's what I want to do. Or, I actually thought I was an acting major, but I think I actually am more of a playwright, or I want to be a playwright and an actor, or I want to be a director and an actor, or I just don't know yet. And I want to get like a general broad overview of each area or dramaturgy, And so that's kind of the difference between the acting major and the theater arts major, but it gives everyone that full year to explore. And we leave it up to the student to make that choice. And so I think it's nice because, they get to kind of guide the tools that get put in that toolbox or like the areas of study, which is cool.
And if you were to sort of say, especially from the acting perspective, where your focus is, whether it's, more in classical theater or contemporary theater or film and TV, is there an area that you feel like you focus a little bit more in or less in?
Well, I feel like it's a good blend. I would say we start with the contemporary work and we start with working from the self into the contemporary work. And then we move into heightened text in the third year, end of second year, beginning of third year. Then the students go abroad in the junior year, spring. And then the senior year is heavily focused on film and television and the transition out of school. So I think it's a good blend of those things. I also think the thing we do a lot lately is new work. So if students are interested in developing new work, new plays, being part of that process, new screenplays, that happens a lot here.
Great. And now I'm going to ask you maybe a tricky question. Let's imagine one of our students got into your school and a number of other good schools. Yeah. Why might they not choose your school? Why do you find students are saying, actually, no, thank you?
The price.
Good answer.
We are extremely expensive. And I'm very transparent about that. And I also ethically feel it is not appropriate for someone in my position to asks students and their families to bankrupt their life to come to an institution. Again, I bring it back to like there's no one school. So I'm very serious about if that's going to happen to you and your family, you should not do that in an undergraduate education. So the price is one of the reasons why people don't come, which is hard, but it's totally fine and I understand it. I think some students, we do take that like 17 to 18 per major, but that means our incoming class of performance is around 30. And so some students want a much larger class than that. Some students want a much smaller class than that. So that can be a reason why people choose different things. Some students want to be in LA and they want to just go to a film school. And like, we get it, if that's what you want to do, you should do that. And I think it's like, for me, it's like, I know when people come here, they either feel it's a fit or they don't. When they interact with us, they either feel it's a fit or they don't. And there's no convincing someone, it's not going to be good to have someone come here where it isn't a fit, because 2 years in, no one's going to be happy with that. So, it really is about like student choice as well. It's not just about us picking people. It's about aligning with the values and the work going on. And like making sure it's a place you can fail, like if you can fall on your face, which students don't like to do. Everyone's a perfectionist, but you have to, and that's what it is to be human. And so if, making sure you go to a school where you feel like, oh, you know what, if I mess up in this room, that's okay. This space will hold me and this is the place to do it, and so I think that's important too.
What about outside of the theater program? What can you get from a Boston University education that goes maybe beyond just the theater program?
Yeah, I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of people do come to us, because BU is a liberal arts institution and we are inside of that as a very rigorous program. And so students still have to take general education requirements, and they want to. Like, those are the kind of students who come here are the ones who are like satiated by taking a psychology class and, like an anthropology class, and it actually feeds their artistry. So there's tons of awesome academic classes here. It's a big urban school. So it's, you've got thousands of kids, but we're the smallest college inside that school. So you've got this very individualized advising, attention, and, work being done. But then you can go out into the community, you can meet tons of people, international students, people from every walk of life. And then we also have tons of student groups and different sports. There are students who join sororities and fraternities in our program. There are students who join dance troupes that perform outside in our program. So, it's a really important thing for people to be healthy outside of our work, so that when they come in the building, they're ready to do our work. And we try to honor that as much as possible. So there's a ton to do. And then you got the city of Boston, which is awesome. And our students also can perform outside of school for credit by partnering with these theaters in Boston, these equity houses that we all know, and we're all friends with people who run them and stuff. And so we do have students do that too and take advantage of that. So it's a nice opportunity to like ease into a cosmopolitan area that has a lot of culture.
I'd love to talk a little bit about a lot of our students who end up choosing Boston University are the sort of MT straddling acting students, when maybe they've applied to a couple acting schools and a lot of MT schools. Maybe they've the opposite iteration, but are still interested in musical theater, but maybe also know that acting focused musical theater school at least is what they look for. So I'd love to talk a bit about that music concentration and what you can offer to that kind of student.
Yeah, it's a track inside the program. It starts in the sophomore year and it's available to either major. So anyone who's an acting major or theater arts can choose to pursue it. We definitely have students who straddle that. Like, I was an MT, I went all MT schools except BU or except, these two acting programs. And we've definitely like yoinked a bunch of MTs into the program. So that's really exciting because we have a lot of really, really skilled singers, some from alumni of your program, and who are doing really good work. But the thing is, when they get out in the world, they are actors, and so they are the rare breed in the New York world that can, like Amber Gray, for example, from Hadestown, is an alum of ours, and like Greg Hildreth is an alum of ours from Frozen. And like, those are people who can like do a Broadway musical, turn around and do an off-Broadway play, turn around and do a film, and they're kind of bouncing between all of those things. And I think that's what differentiates an acting student here with the musical theater focus or ability, is that they get out into the world and they're not necessarily going into the ensemble of chorus line, even though that's a job and that's a very valid job. They're not doing that because they're actors. So they're moving into lead roles and kind of new works and new projects. And they're kind of, I think here, they're very aware of like, we're very aware of the pop rock multitude of worlds that commercial musical theater is going in. And so it's really honoring each individual's voice and not making them achieve what like a recording sounded like or something like that, and asking them to reinvent what the genre is and could be. And I think that's why a lot of them are working in it.
And the track itself, is that it's additional singing classes, or it's additional singing and dance, or how does that work in terms of?
Yeah, sure. So right now it's a 3-course sequence that they're taking, and it's mostly acting focused, but we're obviously singing, but I mean, through the acting lens. And so they're working in class on solo work. They're working on scene work with partners. They're working on group numbers. And then we obviously do an audition technique class where we bring in guest artists and they're putting their rep book together and all of that. And pop rock and stuff. And that's in the final course in the sequence. And then inside that, they're getting vocal coaching lessons every week or every other week for that course. And then we also have students who take additional voice lessons here with us as well, but that's obviously up to them and their choice. And then we have a dance minor on campus that many choose to supplement and take dance courses around our schedule, but you don't have to, because the musical theater track is really meant to be...
That's like a singer-actor track.
Yeah, acting driven.
Well, let's take a really short break and then we'll dive into the BU audition on the back end.
Sounds good.
All right, we are back with Mccaela, where we're going to dive a bit into the audition. So I'm going to ask you a tough question, which is, in short, what do you think makes a great audition for Boston University, or for you?
I mean, because we are a highly regarded program, which is very fortunate, there is a basic level of skill that we're asking people to come in with. That's just assumed for most of the programs that we are peers with, which means, specificity and technique and authenticity and a willingness to be vulnerable and all those things that some people just naturally carry with them. I think the other things are like when you can see students get lit up about the school, either because they knew it was a choice for them or because they just figured out it was a choice for them in that moment. And like, that's exciting because we try to make the audition experience extremely comfortable for people. We usually do an info session beforehand for families. We usually ask students to I don't ask people to slate. I hate that. It's just because I'm already usually talking to them either on the Zoom or in the room, like, hey, where are you from? What's going on? And so I don't need them to be like, hi, my name is we get it. I already am talking to you. That's kind of weird. So then, it's really about an opportunity for them to be themselves and to know, if you mess up and you forget your words, I'm an actor. We're all working as faculty. That's okay. Just start over. And we've had many students who have done that and gotten into the program. So it's, we're not looking for perfection. I think that's what makes a good audition is an authenticity and also being authentic doesn't mean what we're looking for. It means being authentic to you. So if you know that what you want is a film program and you want to go to a school that only takes 5 people, that's okay to, if you want to say that, that's okay. It doesn't mean we wouldn't accept you, but you just may not choose us. That's fine. That's totally fine.
And let's get a little bit more into that idea of skill. Because I think especially from an acting perspective, not everyone always knows what does that mean? I have to be skilled at acting. What are you looking for on that end of thing?
I guess the best way I can describe it is there are some students who come in the room and they don't care we're there. Like they come so alive. They are so clear with their imaginary other on the wall behind us that they have imagined that world. They know what it smells like and tastes like and where the window is. And they have used that imagination so vividly that they would be happy doing this in their basement to a stuffed animal. Like they don't need us in the room. They don't really care we're there, even though I'm sure they do. And they're just in the joy of doing it. And like, that's rare. I hate to say it, but it's rare. And so when you see those people, that's why everyone wants them. And that's why because I think phones are killing people. Like, I think these things are killing us. And I think they're killing students' imaginations, to be honest with you. Where instead of being bored anymore, we just go and we distract ourselves. And that's actually really, really damaging our field. And we have to be aware of that. And so you can see a student who hasn't lived on their screen. You can see a student whose imagination is risky and a little wild. And again, I think with high schools being so like, oh my God, get into college, it's so hard. And the pressure families are under, I think that joy and that risk taking is also rare now. So when we see it, it's like, yes. You know, like someone walks in, they just are like, bam, I'm going to start in the corner of the room. Or they're just like, bam, I'm going to like lean against this mirror and I'm going to use it, you know? And it's like, awesome. Like there are no rules for me other than don't throw a chair at my head. There's no rules for me. So it's like, all right, like this young person and this young artist has the nerve and the guts to come in and do that. Like that's a risk, you know? So that's exciting. And I think it's a privilege to watch those kinds of auditions.
It's beautifully said. All right. Well, you said there's no rules, but is there anything else that you don't want to see in a student's audition other than a chair throw at the head? On Zoom, are there no rules whatsoever? Anything that you feel like, I'd rather you don't show me this?
I don't think there's rules about how people do things, to be honest, because I leave that kind of creative part up to the artist. But I do think like there are tips and things I would say like are helpful. You know, I mean, knowing something about the school might be helpful. Like we can tell when we're just on a list versus when you've actually done some like research in it. And it's amazing what students will give away in an audition setting, will tell us. And I'm like, okay, I mean, interesting information, but you know, so I think it's also figuring out the questions you have for each school. To be honest with you, I'm like more interested in some respects in into like the conversation part of the audition, because like you can see the work and the potential for growth pretty quickly. So I would say I'm more interested in that aspect of it because I want to know the human being and if it's going to be a fit. So I would say definitely that. I would say like your resume, we don't really, I mean, I speak for myself. I don't really care that much about your resume. You know, what's cool about the resume is be like, oh, you studied with Charlie or you studied with so-and-so. Like, I know them. That's awesome. You know, and that it's a very small world in that way. But I'm not worried. Like if you did a Broadway show when you were 9, or if you've never done a show before, that's fine. I'm going to look at like high school is high school, you know? So I'm going to look at like what's in front of me, like the human being in front of me. So I would say like that kind of stuff. Don't worry about it.
You've anticipated my favorite question, which I'll just go a little deeper into, which is if you had to estimate how much of your decision is based on like the skill displayed in the monologues versus maybe the interview questions, the adjustments, right? The other artistic things that happen maybe in a room that go beyond the first performance.
Yeah. Oh my God. That's a great question. I would say maybe, okay, I'm going to be honest and say like 2/3 of the people that come to in each program, let's say, are people who are like, we knew like immediately we wanted to connect with that person. And then I would say there's like 1/3 of people who like their work is really strong, has great potential, but they sit down with you and you're like, this human being is going to be really important for this ensemble of people, you know, or this human being is just a person that is so dynamic that like maybe they don't have the coaching or the access to coaching or, you know, those resources when they've applied, but they're so raw and authentic that stuff we can train, you know, and they just have that thing about them that's like the willingness, the hunger, the dynamic energy. So I would say like, yeah, there's definitely a fair amount of students in the class who fall in that, or they sit down with you and their acting is strong, but they have open up this incredible directing portfolio. And you're like, okay, like, you know, like, and they come alive. And then you're like, because we're not just making a class of just actors, you know, so that's really exciting. So there's always room for that.
And then to the best of your knowledge, how does that work with the academic side of things too? So let's say you want a kid artistically, how does that work in terms of the interplay with the university itself?
Yeah. The total bummer is like, I don't have final say. So basically how it works is students come, they apply to the university, they sign up for their pre-screen. If they pass the pre-screen, they get invited to a callback. And if they're doing the callback, like I can put in an artistic rating at the end of that callback day, and then it goes over to the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, and then they open their academic portfolio. So I have a liaison in admissions. Once that academic portfolio is opened, multitude of things can happen. We might want a person so bad. We might be like, they are amazing and we want to fight for them. But if their academics are well below BU's averages, it's probably going to be a no-go and they'll just get rejected. And usually with those rare students, which is like, 10 or 15 people a year, I will email them at the end of the process and be like, once they hear the no, and be like, this was not an artistic decision. And if you want to talk about transferring, let's talk about it, so, and that's happened a fair amount actually. So sometimes it's a no because BU says it's a no, big BU. Sometimes it's a no because we don't feel it's an artistic fit, even if a student has amazing grades. And if that happens, it's still a no from the university. So I would say it's definitely, I have a conversation with admissions and I can fight for some people. But ultimately the academics have to be in the ballpark to start.
And in this metaphor, were you guys little BU? They're big BU and you're little BU?
Maybe we're wacky BU. I don't know.
You're italicized BU, exactly. I have to give you a personal thank you and shout out for my crusade is to get professors to start calling them callbacks instead of pre-screens and auditions. So I appreciate you calling them callbacks because pre-screens are a live, a videoed audition, and that's a callback.
Absolutely.
People are like, my first audition. I'm like, you already passed the pre-screen. It's not your first audition.
Yeah, no, totally. Oh, can I say one thing?
Please.
Because I get students to ask this a lot. I would say like some schools will tell you if you do a pre-screen and then you get a callback. Some schools will tell you what they'd like you to prepare. But if they don't tell you what they'd like you to prepare, I would say, students always say like, should I do the same piece? Should I not do the same pieces? Sometimes like one of us will be watching pre-screens and not all our colleagues will get to see it. And so we'll be like, oh my God, that was amazing. I want them to come in for us. And I'd love for my colleague to see them do that piece, So I would say more often than not, there's a reason you got called back. So lean into what you've done before, but you don't have to recreate it. Don't try to recreate what you did. Be fresh with it. Let it evolve. Let it emerge. But there must be something in the essence of that piece that encapsulates your essence as an actor. And once you find those pieces, hold on to them and let them grow with you. So I would say that's something I would suggest is like, think about, stay with what worked, and you can always throw in new stuff.
Like you would for any callback. That's why it's a great word for it. Totally. You would always, for the casting director called you back in. Now let's do it. Let's get into that pre-screen a little bit. You guys had, I think, the most dreaded pre-screen this year because
we did?
Well, not most dreaded, but most maybe agita creating pre-screen with the alternative was it an alternative environment that you asked for? So let's talk a little bit about that. So if maybe some of the reasoning behind it and also kind of what you're looking for specifically in your pre-screen.
Happy to talk about that. Yeah, happy to talk about that. Well, we made this decision. We've never done pre-screens before last year, actually. We used to see everyone, which I prefer. But it's just simply the sheer amount of applications has become too much. And so when we went online for Zoom and for like during, 2020, I was like, I want to give everyone an opportunity for me to see a multitude of things like we would in the room. And filming 2 pre-screens against a blank wall in a very limited amount of space for an actor, to me, doesn't leave them the freedom to really access other parts of their artistry. And so I was like, okay, I'll do one of those, right, to get a sense of like, can someone focus and, like see them up close. But then I was like, I want to see how someone's body moves in space. I want to see how their creative mind works, because you can see an actor who also has a directorial mind in this kind of exercise. We're not expecting everyone to have that, and we're not requiring that, but it's fascinating to watch. And it's fascinating to watch some of these pre-screens that are these, site-specific ones that we ask for, because some people take real risks in them, and the way they use the camera is inventive. And it just gives us a sense of like someone feeling more comfortable in a space, regardless of what space that is. And it doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to have fancy lighting. It doesn't have, like we don't need any of that. And I would be really bored watching 1,200 pre-screens of people against blank walls. So it was just like partially selfish, because I was like, I want to just stay engaged in this process for these students. So that's kind of the reasoning behind why we did that. And it was so fun. So fun.
Are there any of the out there site-specific locations you want to let us know about? Or,
the cool thing was there were some students who didn't really light up on the traditional pre-screen. And then all of a sudden they got into their site-specific, and it was like, oh, there you are. Oh my God. And I never probably would have called them back without that aspect of it. So, I think there were amazing things. There was one kid who kind of had this sense of humor, like this dry sense of humor through his work. And he was like on an elliptical with a bathrobe, and he ended up diving into a pool. Now, you don't have to do that. That's not necessary, but it made sense for the monologue. And it enhanced the monologue, even though that's not necessarily the context of where it took place in the play, which is fine. I don't need that necessarily. And so, but like the way he invented it and the way it elevated the text and the way he came to life was like hilarious. I mean, it was so funny. And it really gave me a sense of him or them. I don't know what pronouns they use, but it really gave me a sense of that person. So that is the gift of it, I think. And so there were definitely some really fun explorations last year.
Any bits of advice that you feel like you didn't get to give, maybe especially a 16, 17-year-old, maybe this year, who's about to start the full process, who's, getting into pre-screens and about to kind of do their applications if they haven't started them. It's September 2nd. You should have started them already, everyone. No, but if they're in that place, is there any kind of advice that you'd want to throw someone that way if they're looking at BU?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think there's so many things, but I think a lot of it is like, you'll be okay. I think that's the advice I want to give. Like, you'll be okay. This is one phase of life. If the door that you want to open doesn't open for you, like look around you, because I'm sure there are other doors opening. And I think that's really important in this, because I think people have gotten, and families understandably have gotten really freaked out about this process, and it can feel like a big mystery. And I think it's important for students and families to remember that we're human beings as well, and we have empathy for that. We understand it's gotten a little crazy and out of control. And there are people you will align with in this process, and you should listen to that, regardless of the reputation of a school or how fancy their alumni are. That's wonderful, and that's something to consider. But if that doesn't feel like a fit for you, or doesn't feel like it's going to be a healthy environment for your growth, then you should pay attention to that. And I would urge you to journal after each audition experience, and just notes on like how this interaction made me feel, like what we talked about, just for yourself, so that 2 months later, if you've gotten acceptances, you can go back to that and be like, oh, that's interesting. That's what I didn't remember feeling that way. Or maybe you feel totally differently once you're in accepted, so I think there's the human things. I could give you a million, like, these are the plays to do and not do, or whatever. And that's just my opinion. That doesn't exist, So I could give you all of that from my perspective, but I think it's the people who do best are the ones who can have some perspective around this whole application process, and know that, like, we've had tons of students who didn't get in the first time they auditioned for us and came back around, kept in touch with us, and got in the next year. So like, it doesn't always have to be over if it doesn't go the way you want it,
I love it.
Yeah.
Let's just wrap up with a couple questions in terms of looking back and looking ahead.
Yeah.
I'd just love to talk a little bit about, the specific challenge of 2020 and now as we get into 2021, both from the perspective of, the virtual world that we're now inhabiting, or at least partially inhabiting, and we'll see how that continues.
Yeah.
And then also some of the demands for racial equity that have
Sure.
come up last summer. So how
Yeah.
has BU made adjustments to meet each of those moments?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the virtual stuff, I actually think we learned a lot of really positive things last year. And I know every school is saying that, and they're like, it was, but we really did. I saw, to be honest with you, in my class that we pivoted 2-3 days, after everything happened,
Mm-hmm.
I saw some of the most specific work I had seen. And that was because there wasn't necessarily the pressure of being in the space with all those eyes on you in that moment. So every student got to really focus on what they were doing, and that really elevated the work in a lot of ways. I also think it's awesome now because like Zoom is so normal now, I guess, or that I can call an alum in California and be like, "Hey, can I throw you this, this amount of stipend, and will you just Zoom in on your free time with the students?" And that, like we weren't thinking like that before, or that was more rare. And now it's so accessible, so the students have access to a lot more people, which is great. Yeah, and I think in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, access, that all of that affected every school last year, and we have an incredibly racially diverse program here, and it's nice to see we're moving into a period where our faculty is now reflecting those voices as well, even though each individual has their own experience. So we, as a faculty and staff and students, we've done a ton of trainings. We worked with Nicole Brewer and we worked with Kathy Takayama, and they were really wonderful and thoughtful about asking ourselves, what is our mission? What are we doing? What shows are we producing? What stories do we want to tell? But I have to say that like this has always been a conversation since I started here 8 years ago, and the conversation has gotten hotter and more visible around the country and the world, as it should. But I also say this is a conversation that's been going on for us for a while, and the acknowledgement that it is a difficult conversation, that it's not that it has nuance inside of it, and that's really hard right now in a very charged, bifurcated country, and so it's not easy, those conversations, but the important thing is the willingness to have them as a community, and the willingness to work on them as a community. So yeah, I think that's an ongoing process.
What about the 2022 audition season in terms of the virtual? Are you keeping any virtual auditions? Do you have any plans for exactly how that's going to go this year?
Yeah, it's sort of hybrid. So everyone, ED1 and ED2 applicants can sign up for a live audition. They do not have to submit a pre-screen. Regular decision applicants have to submit a pre-screen by December 1. And then if you're invited to a callback, you'll have a multitude of options to choose from. So you can do an in-person callback that can take place in Boston, New York, or Chicago. We're not going to LA this year. Sorry, California people. We're not going to LA this year because the Super Bowl is there the same weekend and it got too chaotic. But we are, in lieu of that, and in addition to that, we also are offering Zoom callback days and weekends, simply because it's a lot of money to come to these places. It's a lot of time to take away from school for people. And we have a lot of international applicants. So we did the auditions last year all virtually, and they went really well. And so we feel it's important for everyone to have access to us and not necessarily be limited. So yes, we are doing some Zoom, some in person. And no, I do not think one is better than the other. We're not giving preference to those in person. Of course, we'd love to see you in person. But if you must, do Zoom, then yeah, we can still get a sense of someone's essence in that conversation for sure.
And would you suggest Zooming from a treadmill if I have the option, or an elliptical?
If you had the sense of humor of that kid, then yes, go for it. Because that kid was fun.
I love it. Any final thoughts? Anything that we kind of missed? That we go, I really was ahead of my list. I want to talk about this today.
If you Google a monologue and it's easy to find, it's also easy to find for thousands of other people. So the first things that pop up on Google are going to be the most visited, and playwrights are now using the algorithm to bump their stuff up to the top, which is why I saw the same playwright multiple times last year, which is fine. But I would urge you, scroll down some pages or go to a library.
A what, Mccaela?
A library.
I love it. Well, Mccaela, thank you so much for the time today on the pod. It was so great having you.
Thanks, Charlie. I really appreciate your time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Mccaela as much as I did. She's just so smart and warm and an artist. You can really feel her artistry come through just from those first couple sentences. So it was really fun for me, and I hope you guys got a lot out of that. Today, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into a tricky conversation about risk. I think it's a tough one to tackle, since you all are going to ask for kind of rules, and I'm not going to quite give you rules because, of course, what makes something a risk often is how it breaks the rules. So we're going to try to do this, but don't quote me on all of this if it comes out a little bit not perfectly. I thought Mccaela talked really beautifully today about the idea of wanting to see people take artistic risks. I think the trickiest part of taking risks, of course, is that they're risky. And one professor's opinion of what is a genius artistic risk that really pushed the bounds is another professor's pet peeve of, well, why are they always trying to do this? Why can't they just do this kind of safer material, right? That is why my biggest piece of advice, if you only hear one thing about this today, it would be that any risk that you take has to be fully and deeply artistically supported by you. That's capital Y-O-U-U. If you were to take a large risk and someone behind the table were to say, I hate that choice. I wish you didn't do that piece. I don't like what you did there. What Mccaela used the example of, you started in the corner, or you were grabbed a mirror and were using the mirror. I'd want you to be able to go, oh, well then, great. I guess this isn't the school for me. I don't want you to feel that supported by whatever choice you made, that it wasn't just a random risk that you took, but you said, or that you felt, I am the kind of person who wants to take random risks, and if you don't like it, this is not the school for me, right? What I wouldn't want is my high school teacher told me to do this because this school likes risks. Or my young coach maybe said, this is what I did to get into my school, and so that's what I'm going to try to do, right? That's where it's going to start feeling like a trick more than a real risk. It's not really an artistic risk. It's you trying to game your way into the system, right? You may hear of that outlandish audition, like the elliptical person we talked about today, or every year this happens with MTCA with wild card stories. People hear of a crazy wild card that worked well and they want to try to replicate it, right? And they feel like if it worked for that other person, it'll work for me. I do think all of these outlandish choices can work if it's supported for you. But if you think you're doing it just because you're supposed to, we can just smell that immediately. We smell that it feels like somebody else's choice. It's also the kind of thing of like how mature a piece can be, which is often how kind of risky, and you'll hear people talk about, oh, I don't love this risk. I think it also has a lot more to do with the student's comfort level than actually the faculty's comfort level. If you're not completely comfortable with, let's say, the mature level of something, when I say maturity, it could be a subject matter that's risque, it could be colorful language. There's a couple different versions of maturity that I'm talking about there. But if you're not completely comfortable with it, you're going to make me feel uncomfortable. It sort of becomes like watching a car accident happening. As like I see a student who's uncomfortable and the material is coming up on this thing and these things are colliding against each other, as opposed to if you're riding the wave of it because you're really behind it, I'm generally going to be much more comfortable. And like that said, people like Mccaela, the vast majority of these professors are artists themselves, often actively working artists. And whatever you're doing is not going to be the most outlandish thing they've ever seen. It's just that we feel uncomfortable if I feel like something is beyond you and you're trying to be something you're not. You're trying to be, badass with some difficult language that just doesn't feel like it's you. Then I feel like I've just missed the opportunity to meet you and instead met this, maybe your coach who had this great choice and he's like, I got out in school this way. Maybe this will work for you, right? And I don't get to actually see the person that you are, which is almost certainly more interesting than the version of this teacher, this advisor who told you to do this other thing. I also think when we talk about risk, and I think specifically when Mccaela was talking about it here, it does go beyond some of those rules or guidelines, right? And again, to use some examples there, stuff like bringing in props, you're told not to do that. Doing accents, you're told not to do that. Bringing in a piece from a movie instead of a play, right? Those kind of things that may be on schools, hey, don't do this list. Certainly anything that, if you were to do that, would get into the version of a risk, which again, you can do, again, if it's truly supported. There's no true rules, except that there are no rules, right? But sometimes before you necessarily go to those outer edges of what is an obvious rule-breaking kind of risk I can make, I would encourage you to think, how can you take risks within the artistic material itself? Sometimes it's just as simple as like challenging yourself artistically to vulnerably risk what you're doing, right? Which maybe in a dramatic piece, we often talk about like, what does it cost you? Does it cost something more than just an easy run of it where it didn't feel like anything happened, right? Does it feel like this actually cost me something? Sometimes in a comedic piece, can I push the boundaries of what I planned? I may have planned a certain cadence and said, let's see if I don't do the plan and see if I'd actually surprise myself with my own comedic choices, right? That's a version of risk that is really exciting in a room that isn't necessarily fully pushing the boundaries, right? So sometimes it can be a little bit more about discovery than it is about what is so outlandish, and it will still feel like a real risk in the room. This person is willing to take chances and play and try stuff. That's certainly something we'll talk about if we get into adjustments at all, which I'm sure we will at some point on the pod. Well, if you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please hit that follow button. We'd also appreciate it if you were going to rate and review us wherever you found us. 5 stars if you throw chairs like Bobby Knight, and an ironic 5 stars if you just prefer to sit in your chairs. That's okay too. You can also reach out to us with questions for the pod at mailbag@mappingthecollegeaudition.com. If you're interested in working with MTCA for help with your individual prep for your college audition journey, please check us out at mtcollegeauditions.com. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, who knew the second page of Google is basically the new library? We'll see you next week.